Catherine, we're going to shift gears and kind of come talk to you. Thanks for joining us today, Catherine. And I'd like to talk about MedTech innovation, specifically around obviously breast cancer detection and treatment advancements. What are you seeing? And again, for those of you, who are working, feel free to chime in. This could be interactive, but what are some of the most significant advancements that we're seeing in breast cancer detection and treatment in the recent years? And I guess a follow-up would be, what do you see, or what are we seeing with the role of AI?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for including me in this panel. I mean, I feel very grateful that I haven't had this experience, and also a huge amount of respect for everybody that has gone through this. I know it's a really challenging experience. What's interesting in the roles that, the role that I'm in, as well as some of the other folks here on this panel, is, being on the regulatory side of things, you really get to see a pretty broad range, especially as consultants, a pretty broad range of devices, and understand them from a technical perspective, and then being able to go through the approval process for these, right, from especially in the role that I'm in, I get to work with a lot of startup companies where I see ideas that are at the idea stage, literally a thought in somebody's head, all the way through to the launch of that product. And so it's really interesting to see it from that perspective. Some of the, I think several people have brought up some of the medical devices or the medicines that they've used through this process. And, it becomes very clear that there is some things that are used from a diagnostic perspective as well as from a treatment perspective. So many different things that are used through that process. And I'm just going to touch on, just to start with from the diagnostic perspective, because the diagnostics are very important, especially for the earlier the detection, the better the prognosis, right? And the more treatment options there are available to you. So, a lot of the advancements have been really in the, many advancements have been in this diagnostic space where, so some of the things that people brought up, MRIs, ultrasounds, as well as, just at the very beginning when you're doing a mammogram, AI is being utilized in those spaces in so many different ways to improve the diagnostic. So AI can be used to detect, do a detection that's greater than what the human eye can see when looking at some of these scans, and can identify, more localized where the issue might be, so you can get your biopsy at the right place. So AI is being used in those contexts really from an imaging perspective. That's one area where AI is really heavily being used. And it's really interesting to see how that's sort of being implemented on, ultrasound and MRI are used for all kinds of different things, right? But specifically for breast cancer, there have been several AI and software techniques that are really specific to breast cancer, because it is, there is a very localized aspect to this to inform on what treatment options there are. So that's one area that's pretty significant. One other thing, and I'm not sure if any of the folks on this panel have gone through this, but I at least have one friend who had breast cancer, and her mom had breast cancer, and she was able to do some genetic testing to identify both her and her sister, to identify that they had the gene. And her and her sister took different approaches. One of them did double mastectomy when she was very young because she just didn't want to have to deal with it. But there's been a lot of advancements in these genetic testing, not just for the BRCA genes, but as well as genes that have been linked to breast cancer. So there's a lot of advancements in that in vitro diagnostics or IVD space as well. And those are very critical to really get to understand, how can we detect these sooner so that we can treat more effectively, more quickly, and get through that process in an easier way, right? So it's really interesting to see a lot of those things. One other way I just want to mention too, one other aspect of AI that's being used is really in determining what are good treatment programs or treatment regimes for different people. And so AI is being used to take in information about your family history, about your allergies or anything that's about you, and it can use that to then determine, based on your or based on the diagnostics that you've used, if it's genetic or some of the scanning mechanisms, it can then sort of propose different treatment programs that might work for you based on all of that information. And I think several people have mentioned how difficult it was to make some of those decisions, and I think at that point in time when you're going through that process of just processing that you have this disease, you're also trying to come to terms with, this is where I'm at, but now what do I do next? And I think that's a really challenging part, is to understand, here's all of the things that I know about myself, my family, what are the right choices for me moving forward? And I think it's interesting to use AI in that context, which isn't necessarily, what we think of as medicine, but is so critical when it comes to being able to move forward in this process, which, several of you have spoken to that. It's a process, it's a journey. Some of the other things, from a diagnostic standpoint, I talked a little bit about those, but also folks brought up a lot of different things here around medical devices, medicines that are used. Once you have detected it, then the next steps are, how are you going to treat that? Is it going to be through a mastectomy? And there's certainly, there's many devices that are used during any kind of surgery, the surgical instruments, the electrosurgical units. There are so many medical devices that we don't even notice as we go through, or, I'm sure that many people go through this process and don't necessarily look around and say, wow, I'm so grateful that there's all of these medical devices. But really, it's just fascinating how medicine has really come along in recent years. And for particularly for breast cancer, there are a lot of additional therapeutics that are coming on board, on top of the mastectomy and all of the devices that are used in the surgical space. Even after that, from a radiology standpoint, from using therapeutic drugs, those are really also really critical, and there's been a lot of new advancements there, particularly with targeted kinds of therapies. So immunotherapy, monoclonal antibodies, like Herceptin, for example, they can target specific proteins that are expressed on breast cancer cells. And then they can deliver medicines at a localized site instead of, having some of the side effects that you're going to get from a systemically delivered therapy. Also, I find it really fascinating what immunotherapies are doing, which these are really sort of new in this space, but essentially they're drugs that sort of get the body to respond with their own immune system and recognize and attack cancer cells. And I believe strongly that, our bodies are freaking amazing. I mean, and so, yes, there are times where our bodies are kind of working against us, and this is definitely one of those cases. And I find these kinds of therapies that are sort of taking advantage of your body's natural mechanisms to fight these kinds of things. I just find those to be really fascinating therapies. Also, from a radiation standpoint, I know a couple of people have said they're, perhaps using the chemotherapy routes. Radiation is just going through a lot of advancements in terms of targeting that radiation to the specific site. So, not having to really getting a very targeted approach to that and honing in on here's where the radiation treatment is needed so that you can minimize the impact on healthy cells and healthy tissues. So, I think there's a lot of advancements going on. One other thing I'll mention I worked with a device that it's actually a combination product, and these are products where chemotherapeutics are great when you need them, but they're not great if you're the clinician that's administering them and you're starting to get exposed to them. So there's things that are called closed system transfer devices, and this sort of keeps the clinician safe while also getting the treatment to the patient. A lot of times when you're transferring these medications, there's aerosols that come up, and what they were finding over many years is that clinicians, like most frequently nurses, who there is a higher proportion of women who are nurses, were actually getting different kinds of cancers because they were repeatedly exposed to these chemotherapeutics. So these devices are things that sort of prevent that aerosolization or prevent the exposure. And I think those are really important, just to think about from the perspective of, while we're treating some patients, we also need to keep the clinicians safe at the same time, so that we're not promulgating more sickness, right? So I just think those are some of the things that are just so interesting. And we see, like Stephanie mentioned, she's seeing her radiologist on some of the documents that she's reviewing. I think that there's just so much out there, and I think it's really gratifying for me to see how those are impacting the lives of people around me. So while I'm working with the FDA to get things approved, working with those clients, and they're trying to decide, what kind of testing do I need to do? Do I have to do this? What do I need to do to show safety? What do I have to do to show effectiveness? I just feel like, being in this space is just is so fascinating to be able to say, yeah, I understand what needs to be done from a safety and effectiveness perspective, and also understand how that then gets translated into use, right, and into the patients, right, and understanding their perspective. So just, I think one thing I think about sometimes is that line from Hamilton that's like, aren't we lucky to be alive right now? From a technology perspective, I just think especially with AI and how that's coming online and how that's being used in medicine, I just think that that's a really this is a fascinating time to be alive and see the kind of advancements that are happening right now. And, I recognize how that might be sort of antithesis to the experience that some folks have when they're going through breast cancer. But I guess if I was going to have to decide to get breast cancer now versus 100 years ago, I'd probably decide now might be a better time, right? So, I think there's a lot going on right now. I'm really grateful to be part of understanding a lot of the advancements that are happening. And also hearing the stories from the folks here and how many of these devices, medications, have really helped in their journeys.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you so much. I'd like to start wrapping some things up, and I'll leave you all with one question. Having gone on this journey that you've been on, how do you feel it has influenced your professional lives, and most importantly, your role here at RQM Plus? Erin, I might start with you.
Yeah, so I think in terms of my role, I professionally, I don't think of, I guess what I want to say is, having been a patient, it definitely has influenced my professional life, and it influences my role at RQM Plus, because I felt so confident with the medicines and the devices and the machines that were used to treat my cancer. And I realized I feel a real responsibility, kind of like what Catherine was talking about. Like, I feel a responsibility to ensure that any device that I help bring to the market is safe and effective, for the patients who are going to be impacted by them. I'm acutely aware that there's a patient on the other side, at the other end of the regulatory process, and that they need the device to be safe, and especially they need the device to be effective, right? So I've worked with companies all different types of devices, and whether it's like a surgical instrument or a software tool that analyzes patient scans, I think my experience in going through, being a patient myself, it really brings to mind that I need to hold them close and to be an advocate for their health, and really it helps me be better at my job and ensure that the devices that get to market are going to be in the best interest of patients.
Yeah. Bethany, I'll hand it over to you to talk as well.
I'm going to bring up one specific anecdote in terms of, seeing the regulatory from the patient perspective. When I was getting my biopsy done and the radiologist was describing the biopsy marker that was going to be put in place, and I had 3 placed at that time. He kind of described it as a little piece of foil that was going to be placed, and it'll be able to get picked up on x-ray, and we'll see where the biopsy was done. So it's like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then one of the first few devices I worked on when I got into regulatory was a breast biopsy marker. And when I started reading into it, I'm like, this isn't a little piece of foil. It's actually a rod. Or this other one is like a butterfly shape, and this other one is a paperclip shape. So when I was tasked with writing an SSCP, so a summary of safety and clinical performance, a piece of which needs to be available to patients, and it needs to kind of describe the device and the safety and effectiveness for patients. That's when it really hit home to me. I'm like, okay, so the way that my doctor described this to me, I'm going to try to do a little bit better. So I can appreciate that perspective now when we're tasked with not just, your regulatory, some people think of them as box checking exercises, but when we're tasked with something that is going directly to patients. Like, I think it's a lot easier now, for me at least, to see that patient perspective, and to really get a feel for, what the patients want to be hearing and what's important to them.
Very nice. Great example, Bethany. Thank you. Heather, I'm going to pass it over to you.
So I think what it's given for me is, well, I'm in the finance world, so I don't think it's like directly affected anything, but I think it's given me like a newfound appreciation for what we do, because actually the first time that I went and got the ultrasound, they sent me for a mammogram after, and I think that was the first time that I actually saw it, and it like made me realize that what we're working on, I'm actually seeing in these offices. So, and then also on the trial side, I think it's just really cool that we're doing those studies, because I have friends a friend that was in a trial for her brain cancer. So I think it just affects me differently because I see the real life examples of it.
Thank you. Julie, we'll end it with you.
Me, I started out my career in public accounting because like HD, I'm in finance, but immediately was drawn to working for companies that helped people. So I actually went to work for a med device company, MedRad, which was acquired by Bayer, and spent a large portion of my career there, just loving that even though I was in finance, I was able to contribute to such a good, I felt like I was still helping other people. Fast forward to keeping that career going with RQM Plus, and some of those products that were used, some of those med devices, I used a MedRad injector in that CT room, and so I think it just brings it full circle to say I love that I am able to help support those people that are really making those med devices and providing those consulting. So even though we're in the background, we're still part of the team that helps get these MedTech devices to market. I really just want to say, kind of end what I wanted to say just by saying thank you. First, if you've listened this long to all of us, thanks, right? If you've stuck with us, it really is a topic that I think we're all passionate about. I really, thanks to anybody that has either worked or is still working at a MedTech company, because guess what? You're the ones that are making MedTech. And really, I want to thank everybody that's still working at RQM Plus, because you're the reason MedTech is happening. And without everybody that is working at those companies and keeping this stuff moving forward, those MedTech devices and may not have been available for all of us that are sitting on this call today. So just thank you, because without all of you, like, I might not be sitting here sharing my story today, just alongside these 3 other amazingly fierce women that have gone through this journey that we don't wish upon anybody else, but we are here for you if it ever happens to you as well.
Yes, I think there's one thing that we didn't touch on that I think might be nice, is the sort of the aspect of mental health associated with this whole process. And just, to say one little thing, for me, the little story that I had sort of thought about sharing, was there was a nurse, a specialist nurse who I spoke to when I was going through chemo, and she said to me, she's like, "Erin, I've been watching you and listening to you over the past couple of weeks, and you're doing amazing. You're someone who's highly organized, makes plans, executes them, and you're working through treatment beautifully." She's like, "Just keep doing what you're doing." I just want to tell you, though, that in my experience, I've seen women like you cope really well when there's a plan and actions to be taken, but sometimes women like you don't cope very well. You might struggle a little bit in a year from now when life goes back to goes back to normal. You might not. She's like, "You might not, but if you do, I just encourage you to seek help." And at the time, I kind of blew her off. Kind of said, I've got a great support system. I have lots of coping strategies, but I have to be totally honest. She nailed it. A year after being diagnosed, after the bulk of my treatment was complete, I really started to struggle mentally. I was scared all the time. I was anxious. I felt out of control. And I remembered the nurse's warning, and I sought help. I went and connected with a therapist who specialized in helping patients deal with their, cancer diagnosis or their cancer journey, or even, for me, it was, after everything was sort of settled down. And she sort of helped me to realize that what I was dealing with was uncertainty. And I think the last thing I just wanted to say was, none of us are promised a long and healthy life, but we don't think about that on a regular basis, or at least I didn't, and I probably at this point don't think about that as much anymore. But life can change in an instant, and for me, going through cancer treatment was harrowing, but I found it really helpful to talk to somebody about my experience and have her validate sort of what had happened and help me sort of name what my fears were and navigate that new normal. I'd spent a year with my head down surviving and figuring out, sort of how to get through that part of the journey. But then it was, coming out the other side, thinking about how do I move forward and how do I move on from that experience. And, I think it's at every step of the way, it's connecting with how you are, with what's going on in your own health and well-being. And when you're at any step of the way, asking for help and making sure that you get it, and advocating for yourself. I think it's really important.
Mine was a little bit different, though. For me, it was finding a few other people that had been through a similar experience as me, kind of my same age, that I could talk to and share kind of the fears, the concerns, the just the feelings that you have. It is that anxiousness, and it still happens some days now, right? But to your point, Erin, it's not on the hour, every hour like it used to be at the beginning. Now it comes and goes, but there are certainly times where you immediately get in your head and the what ifs come back, and it's hard to at points kind of push that anxiousness down or deal with it in the right way to be able to keep moving on. And then there are times where you really need to listen to what your body's telling you, and that's when you take it that step further with your doctors and kind of push for the additional tests that maybe you need because you're worried. Maybe it's peace of mind that it gives you, and if so, that's okay. And other times it's because you know your body best, and guess what? We are all the ones that kind of found what wasn't supposed to be there before it should even happen to us. I think Vicki threw the statistic up at the beginning of the call, and you're looking at this all four of us, 100% under 40 at when diagnosed.
Well, again, thank you all so much for sharing. It's very brave and very courageous. And I hope others, learn from it like we all do. Thank you so much for being a part of the panel today. And Catherine, thank you for joining as our RQM Plus expert, although we've got a lot of experts on the call today. But thank you all so much.